But last month, it was my birthday, September, and we were driving. It was a Sunday, and William and I and our family, we were driving to church, and we were kind of pulling into the parking lot. And I looked at William, and he was like, honey, it's your birthday. And he was trying to surprise me. He's like, we had something planned later that day, but he's like, what do you want to do today? I can't believe it's your 30-something birthday. And he was like, wow, what do you want to do? And I was like, I looked at him and I was like, I don't know, but this is the happiest I've ever felt in my life. And I'm getting emotional because I looked at him and I was like, I can't believe I can say that. Like, this is the happiest I've ever been in my life. I'm so happy. I don't care what we do. I'm just so happy. And when I said that, he looked at me and he smiled and he's like, yeah, husband points. He's like, yeah, I know, I'm doing well. But he is a great husband, but when I was saying that, I couldn't believe I was saying that because I think to many people that would be an ironic statement. Because I have 3 kids under 5. We're church planting. To be honest, and don't get me wrong, I'm the happiest I've ever been in my life, but I'm exhausted most days. I try to take a shower every day. Is that TMI? But I don't get to because it's just so crazy. So we have 3 kids. We're church planting. And I think to many people, me saying that this is the happiest I've been in my life is an ironic statement. It's like, what? How can this be the happiest time in your life, And I stopped and I reflected that week, and I just couldn't believe I said that. I was like, I wonder why, that just came out of me so naturally. And after reflecting, I've come to the conclusion that it's actually because it's the most in touch with my soul I've ever been in my life. I was always so accustomed to ministry, go, grad school. I was a PhD student for 6 years, so it's like, gotta get my papers done, gotta get everything done, gotta move on to the next thing. I had a baby, and so everything's just go. But this season in my life, this year in my life, is the first time I have been in touch with my soul. Like the exhaustion of my soul, the weariness of my soul. I've had enough space to actually slow down and feel what's in my soul. I've also been able to slow down enough to feel the longings of my soul. Like, what do I want to do right now? What are the stirrings in my soul? And so I've realized that the reason why I've been happy is because I've slowed down. I remember a year ago, most of you guys have heard this story, but a year ago, we were on sabbatical, and the last few months of our sabbatical, we were talking to our therapist. William and I were talking to our therapist about what we hoped for and what we desired for when we get back, when we return from our sabbatical. And guys, our sabbatical was amazing. We had never completely unplugged, like completely, where we turned off our phones, our work, just everything. We just unplugged for 4 months. And so our sabbatical was amazing. In fact, William's nickname during that time was Sabbatical Daddy, because it was like no work, no schedule, nothing. It's play, laugh, eating candy all day, So it was like, and I remember there was one time in our therapy session where William was tearing up and he said, as I'm going back, I want to be Sabbatical Daddy. I don't want this to just be during sabbatical. I want to be this dad to my kids all the time. And for me, when I thought about what I desired in my times of prayer, my hope for when I return from sabbatical is I would close my eyes and I would see a forest. And I would see a forest that was lush. It was green. There were trees. There were streams of water. It was almost wondrous, like magical, almost like maybe it's my image from Narnia or something, but it was a magical forest. And the way I interpreted that image was abundance. I knew that the desire of my heart coming back from sabbatical, coming back into work, into regular life, was to live a life of abundance. I wanted to live in the deepest parts of my heart. I wanted to live a life with love. I wanted to actually feel love with joy and peace, the abundant life that Jesus promised. And at that point in my life, because I was so burned out, I was used to scraps of peace, scraps of joy, scraps, just moments of peace when I desperately needed it. But I told God, as I'm going back into ministry, as I'm going back out of sabbatical into work, I want to live a life of abundance like you promised. But if I'm to be honest, and maybe this is many of us, the abundant life felt like a myth. It felt like something Jesus just said, but something that I've tried to live out so many times, but I would find myself in cycles of burnout all the time. And this year, as William and I, before we came into sabbatical, we made adjustments. We asked God for wisdom. We asked people for mentors for wisdom. And I feel like in many ways I'm living in answered prayer because now I am living in that abundance. I'm not scraping away for moments of peace, but every day I've implemented rhythms. I have margin. I have space for me to stop and be in touch with what's happening in here and what's happening here. And so today, actually, I'm going to launch our church. I'm going to kick off our series with our series called Margin. So for the next few weeks, we're going to go through a new series called Margin. And today, I'm going to start our series off with a message called A Life with Margin. And so at this point, you're like, okay, you've talked about margin. You've talked about how you've slowed down. But what is margin? I found a quote that I really love by someone named Richard Swenson, and he wrote, "Margin is the space between our load and our limits. It is the amount allowed beyond which is needed. It is something held in reserve for contingencies or unanticipated situations. Margin is the gap between rest and exhaustion, the space between breathing freely and suffocating." And so we all have our load. I'm a mom, so I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I have work, we're church planting, that's my load. So we all have our loads, but I also have my limits, and you also have your limits. So margin is that space where we could slow down, we could breathe. It's that space between, again, load and limit. So the reality is that when it comes to margin, we all experience margin differently. We all experience a pace of life differently. I made a little table for you guys to kind of help you picture where you might fall into. But when it comes to margin, most of us fall into 3 different categories. The first category is you might have a lifestyle of margin where you have rhythms, you have space, you have regular time in your schedules in your day to actually slow down and enjoy some margin in your life, some empty space where you can actually breathe. For some of us, we experience pockets of margin. And I would actually imagine this is most of us in this room. We experience pockets of margin. And the third is burnout, where there's no margin, which I'm sure many of us or some of us in this room might also be experiencing as well. And so first, I'm going to talk about a lifestyle of margin. A lifestyle of margin is having the space to actually slow down, to actually be so in tune with your soul that you could feel love and joy and peace in your heart and your soul. You actually have rhythms of rest. You're not just resting when you have to, but you have rhythms of it in your everyday life or maybe a weekly rhythm. But there's some sort of rhythm in your life where you can actually rest. Spiritual practices, you can actually slow down and actually practice Sabbath. You can practice prayer. You can go into the Word and meditate. You can practice silence and solitude. There's space for interruption. So you have enough margin in your schedule where you can be interrupted. Like you can come across, maybe you're driving and you see something at a park, like a farmer's market, and you have enough margin to stop and say, oh, I want to check this out. I want to see what, you have space for interruptions. And even practically, margin is when you have space in between meetings. A lot of us, we're so used to going from meeting to meeting. Maybe we're driving faster than we should. I know that's me. I'm like driving faster than I should. Or I'm in line at grocery stores and I'm just trying to get to the fastest line possible because I don't have margin. But margin is when you could move at a slow pace. It's when you're not hurried. And so that is what a lifestyle of margin would look like. We can actually enjoy play and fun and have hobbies. And overload in our lives, which is pockets of margin, is when we're packing our schedules with work, with social events, with families. We're saying yes to too many things. I remember in college, I knew I was burned out when I was studying for midterms. And that night we had planned, in our college ministry, we had planned a birthday party. And I was studying for midterms. I had a term paper due the next day. And as I was driving to the birthday surprise, I was like, why are there so many birthdays? Like, why are we celebrating everybody's birthday? Why is there a birthday every week? Like, do they want us to fail in school? And I remember I was getting so irritated because I was burned out. I didn't have margin. I said yes to too many things. And some of you guys are looking at each other. Don't do that. You're going to ruin friendships. But I was wondering, why are there so many birthdays? And now when I think about it, it sounds ridiculous. But because we overpack our schedules, we're feeling rushed. We're experiencing irritability, restlessness. You're trying to read the Bible, but you're checking your phone. You're trying to practice silence and solitude, but you're looking around and shifting around. Hypersensitivity, maybe comments that normally wouldn't bother you, like, I don't know, just comments. Like for me, sometimes my husband's like, oh, are you going to dress the kids that way? I'm like, dress the kids what way? Like, what's wrong with this, It's like I'm hypersensitive. Things that people normally say to me or questions that people normally ask me wouldn't bother me, but I'm hypersensitive because I'm feeling rushed. I'm not living at a slowed down pace. Low-grade anxiety. This is where I think a lot of us feel this. Just every day, you just feel a little anxious. It's not to a point where it takes you out or where you have to take a day off, but it's just kind of always there, low-grade anxiety. And so, and out of order priorities. This is a huge one. I think when we're hurried and rushed, we say yes to all the wrong things and no to all the things that actually matter. We're reactive and not proactive. We make decisions that are urgent and not important. And so oftentimes we'll cancel on the people that actually give you life, like your friends. And you say yes to coworker networking meetings that might actually drain you. So we have priorities that are out of order. We're not getting the 8 hours of sleep we need. We're not taking care of our basic needs. A slippage of spiritual disciplines where, reading His word or even just spending time just being before God becomes burdensome. It becomes something we have to do. And so when we are overloaded, we feel all of these things. And finally, when we're overloaded for too long, we hit burnout. And this is when we start booking emergency vacations. Suddenly you're like, I just need to get away. I need to escape from this. So it's an emergency vacation. Escapist behavior where we start binge watching on Netflix or binge watching the Kardashians or, whatever. Like we start trying to distract ourselves from what we're feeling, the anxiety we're feeling, the fatigue we're feeling. Addictions, things that we've struggled with in the past. I know for me, this is very, very common for me. Things that I've struggled with in the past. When I'm tired and overworked and burned out, it all comes back. I just fall into thought patterns and things that I've done in the past. Spiritual and emotional numbness. It's where someone might be sharing with you how they're struggling. And you're like, okay, I'm struggling too. Like you're numb to other people, but you're also numb to your own emotions. You're burned out. And last but not least, I think isolation. When we're burned out for so long, we experience isolation from each other, but also from God. Burnout, it's that place of God, are you really with me? God, is the abundant life real? And we're filled with doubt. We start feeling that isolation, that farness from God. And so for many of us, when we look at these different categories, a lifestyle of margin, pockets of margin, and burnout, I think for many of us, pockets of margin are a norm. We're so used to having pockets of space, pockets of time, and we're accustomed to living life on the fringes and fumes. And I don't know if I'm speaking to anybody here, but I was so used to that. I just thought that's normal. This is just what it is. I'm working. I'm trying to be a good mom. I'm trying to be a good wife. This is just, it's just normal for me to be tired, and it's okay. And we carry on that way. And even our culture and society, right? Like, we're always thinking about what we need to do next. We're on Instagram and social media or LinkedIn, and we're comparing our jobs, like how much we've accomplished, and it always feels like it's not enough. And because of that, we feel like we need to get ahead. Even on our free time. I just want to objectively say this. Like, even on our free time, we're like, I listen to podcasts. I read books on how to be productive. I read leadership books. This is on our free time. Like on our free time, we should be eating good food, like Korean barbecue. We should be hanging out with friends. We should be laughing with the people that fill our souls, right? But that's so common nowadays. It's like, what do you do in your free time? I listen to 5 different podcasts. Oh yeah, I listened to that episode. And that's the society, that's culture, that's the pace at which culture is telling us to live. And so a lot of us, because it's so normal, we don't know when we actually pass from margin to overload. We keep going, packing our schedules, working, and then one day you're like, whoa, I'm burned out. And for some of us, it's been a long time coming. Your friends could tell you it's been a long time coming. Your family members could have told you it's been a long time coming. But you've been going so fast, trying to be at 100% all the time because that's what your work needs you to be. That's where your family needs you to be. That's where you expect yourself to be. So we're going 100% all the time, and suddenly we're burned out. And so we don't know when we pass from margin to overload because we're so accustomed to having that rushed and hurried feeling. I remember my mentality at my first job. I was so excited to my first job out of college. This is I don't know how many years, 10 years ago out of college. And I remember I was so excited for my interview. I wore a suit. I was sweating. It was a nonprofit. I was they were asking me questions. I was wiping sweat away. But I got that job. And I remember when I got that job, I was so thankful to God. So thankful because I knew I didn't deserve it. He gave it to me. But a few months passed by, and I feel like I need to perform. I feel like I need to prove that I was someone worth being there, that I was worth, a promotion or worth someone that they hired. And so my mentality was, well, this is what it takes. I'm tired, but this is what it takes for me to perform well at work. I'm fatigued, I'm a little anxious, but this is normal. This is just what it takes. This is a season. It's my first job. I need to prove that I can do this. And that's the mentality that a lot of us have, and that society tells us it's okay to have that. It's okay this is what it takes to grind. This is what it takes to get that Tesla or get that house. This is what it takes. And for a lot of us, we just think, I'm going to keep pushing myself till I finally get that job I wanted. I'm going to keep pushing myself till I get that promotion that I've prayed for so long. Or I'm going to keep pushing myself because it's just a season. It's just a moment. It's just this year in my life where it's going to be crazy. But can I be the bearer of real news, not even bad news, real news? There will always be busyness in your life. There will always be rush in your life. There will always be that feeling of not enough, that feeling of being hurried, that feeling of needing to achieve more, to be successful, that needing to do more and pack our schedules. It will always be there unless we make an intentional decision to slow down. Your boss is not going to tell you to slow down and meditate and think about how loved you are by God. Even some of your friends, they're going to say, yeah, you just got off work. Let's go and let's take this vacation and let's do all these things. And in good heart, we say yes. We're like, yes, this is what I need. And we say yes to so many different things. But in reality, life is not going to slow down. It's not just a season. It's not just a year or a week. It's the lifestyle in which we live and culture and society tells us to live. And so how do we actually slow down? We have to make an intentional decision to say, I am not going to live this way. I am not going to let my busyness, my work, my burdens, my worries, my anxiety make the most important decisions for me in my life. I am not going to be driven by this feeling of being rushed and hurried all the time. And so what happens is when we stay there when we don't stop and intentionally make that decision to slow down, our relationships deteriorate, our mental health and our health deteriorates, and our souls deteriorate. And maybe this is the biggest thing for us, right? Is that maybe you take that emergency vacation and you come back and you're still restless. You slept 10 hours, you wake up, you're still anxious. You spend time with your friends all day and they're encouraging you. They even pray for you and tell you, God is with you. And we still feel that fatigue. And so what we really need to address is the weariness of our souls. The weariness of the heaviness of our souls, the burdens that our souls carry. Because we're spiritual beings. We're designed to live in communion with God. And so what is the solution here? Am I telling you to quit your job? Don't look at your friend. You're like, yeah, you need to quit that job. So what am I saying? Is the solution here to quit your job? Is the solution here that we need more time? And I want to tell you that it's not, because sometimes I've experienced this even during my maternity leave. The more time I have, the more I pack it. The more I try to do more things. The solution here is found in Matthew 11:28, which is one of the verses that we love and we hang on to here at our church. In Matthew 11:28, it says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." The solution to our hurried lifestyles, to our overloaded schedules, to living with pockets of margin is to adopt the lifestyle of Jesus. And this verse is thrown around all the time in our society. In our churches, right? In our communities, even with our friends. You might have Instagram or tweeted this verse this week, right? It's like, find rest for your souls. Take my yoke upon you. And it's thrown around. But when we really understand what Jesus is saying, he's not just saying, hear what I'm teaching, but he's saying, see how I live. He's saying, take my yoke upon you, take on my teachings, but see how I do it. And Jesus, he's not speaking to the religious elite. He's not speaking to the Pharisees. He's speaking to people, the children of Israel, who were burned out on religion. They were burned out on the yoke of the church. They were burned out by the yoke of what the religious teachings were telling them to do. They were burned out people. And he was saying, come, if you're weary and you're tired, come to me. Because I promise you, I will give you rest for your souls if you would take my teachings and you would take my yoke upon you. Because my yoke, my way of living, my way of doing this life with God, with my Father, it's light and it's easy. So there's something wrong, right? When we hear this verse and we're like, God, you promised an abundant life. You promised a restful life, and I've tried it all. I've gone to church and I've done all these things, but why am I not finding rest for my soul? It's because a lot of us, we read what he's teaching us, but we don't do what he was teaching us to do. We don't take his lifestyle. And so Jesus, he didn't say, when we read this verse, he didn't say, come and worship me on Sunday and live the way you want throughout the week. Come and join a home group and do whatever you want throughout the week. But he's saying, come and be with me, live the way I did. And where in the Bible do we see Jesus living on margin? Come on, guys. Jesus lived on margin. Like, he had space in his schedule to enjoy life as a man in the flesh, God in the flesh. We see that Jesus was living on margin. I'm getting excited because this was so revelatory for me. It just changed my life because I was like, oh, I can have fun. Like, I can live the way Jesus did and I can have this abundant life. But where do we see Jesus living on margin? He had time to have meals with friends and family. He enjoyed wine and food. He was reclining at the banquet table and eating with his disciples, his loved ones, his closest friends. He had intentional time. He had intentional time to get away from work, from ministry, and to get away from the crowds. He had intentional time to pray and just be with the Father. And this is Jesus, you guys. I want to remind you, this is Jesus. He had thousands and thousands of people following him. He had crowds following him. He was discipling his disciples. He was coming to literally save the world. And yet he still had margin to do all of these things. He had space for interruptions, for unplanned interruptions, which showed me that he had margin. Did you guys know that most of the miracles that Jesus performed were unplanned? They were interruptions. It was someone coming up to him and saying, Jesus, I've heard you can heal the sick. Can you come and see my daughter? Jairus came, the story of Jairus, right? So Jesus, he had space for interruptions. And so Jesus, we can see that he made intentional time to get away. He had intentional time to be with the Father. He had a lifestyle that allowed him to live in overflow and remain in the Father's love, his God the Father, and his identity as God's beloved. In John 15, verses 9 to 10, it says, as the Father have loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remained in his love. He's not asking us to do something that he hasn't already done. He had a lifestyle of rhythms and practices that allowed him to remain in the Father's love. And as a result, remain in his identity as the beloved. And so today, what I want to do is, in the next few weeks, as we continue our series on margin, we're going to go over practices that Jesus practiced, and we're going to be teaching on those things. And so today, actually, what I wanted to teach you guys and cover today is silence and solitude. I feel like this and Sabbath is the two things that I've really implemented. William and I have both really implemented this year in our lives. It's not an option for us. It's not just a practice. It's actually our priority. We prioritize our schedules and our lives around these practices because these practices have given us the margin, the space to slow down and be in touch with our souls. And what I practice, even with a mom of 3, even with kids that can't feed themselves, even with kids where I have to change their diapers every day, I have managed to really practice silence and solitude, and it's changed my life. And so today I'm going to be talking about silence and solitude, which is a spiritual practice that gives us the space to receive and remain in God's love. It's during our times of silence and solitude that we get in touch with our inner selves, our soul, and it helps us get in touch with what's actually happening in here. And by solitude, I simply mean being away with God, just being alone with him, being away with God alone. And by quiet, I mean being in the presence of God. So first, I'm going to talk about how Jesus practiced silence and solitude. I just talked about how Jesus actually did these practices. And so Jesus would practice silence and solitude as he would often retreat to a solitary place. The Greek word is actually eremos, and it says it often describes the places that Jesus went to as solitary, lonely, desolate. It was used to describe places like a desert and a wilderness. So in Mark 1, verses 35 to 36, it says, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary eremos place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him. In Mark 6, verses 30 to 33, it says, the apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they didn't even have a chance to eat, he said to them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet, eremos place and get some rest. So they went away by themselves to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all towns to get there ahead of him. Are you guys feeling? Jesus had so many demands. In Luke chapter 5, verses 15 to 16, it says, yet the news about him spread all the more so that crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely eremos places and prayed. And so what do we see? I think growing up, I've always thought of Jesus, the miracle worker. Jesus, like the healer. Jesus, the one who did so much. But in the past year, in the past few years, as I've studied the life of Jesus, as I've been trying to learn about how Jesus actually lived his life, I see, and we can see, that he actually made intentional time to get away. He didn't just give in to the demands of people. He didn't give in to the demands of what people desired from him, to what he probably even felt, compassion and wanted to heal everybody who asked him to heal them. But he made intentional time to get away from the demands of ministry, the noise of the crowds, and the needs of everyone around him. And so in the same way, silence and solitude is us making that intentional decision. I almost want to say it's like an act of resistance against our crazy society and culture today. We're making the intentional decision to get away from the busyness of our everyday lives and to be with God with no other agenda than to simply be with him. Solitude is not about being alone. It's about communing with God. So solitude, we don't mean you have to go to the mountains, go to a retreat site and literally get away, but it's simply getting away just to be with him. Henry Nouwen, there's a verse that we really love when we share about silence and solitude. He shares that solitude is the place of the great struggle and the great encounter. The struggle against the compulsions of the false self and the encounter with the loving God who offers himself as the substance of the new self. In solitude, I get rid of my scaffolding, no friends to talk with, no telephone calls to make, no meetings to attend, no music to entertain, no books to distract, just me. Naked, vulnerable, weak, sinful, deprived, broken, nothing. It is in this nothingness that I have to face in my solitude, a nothingness so dreadful that everything in me wants to run to my friends, my work, and my distractions so I can forget my nothingness and make myself believe that I am worth something. I remember the first few times I actually really implemented silence and solitude in my life. It was really hard. I would close my eyes and all I would think about is the things that I need to do. The next thing that I should be doing. Oh, why did I say that to someone yesterday? I shouldn't have said that. Oh, should I text them right now and say sorry? I started thinking about the mistakes I made, the things I said to my husband I shouldn't have said. And my mind, the noise of my mind, which is so exhausting, is at full-blown speed when I enter that moment of silence and solitude. But if I sit there long enough, my true false self or my true self starts emerging. And it's the part of myself that's my performing self. I can identify it. I can see it. Oh, I said this because I wanted them to think highly of me. It's my fearful self. My worries start surfacing. Oh, I'm actually worried about money this month because of this fear, like the deeper fear beyond that. I'm faced with my emptiness or my inner child that wants affirmation so badly, or my noisy mind and my restlessness. When I sit in silence and solitude, when I sit in that moment with God long enough, I let the sediment settle. I let everything fall, and I just sit there. I get in touch with my brokenness. I get in touch with why I've been working so hard. I get in touch with why that day I was rushing from the next thing to the next thing, and I'm able to actually be in touch with what's happening at a soul level. I'm not reasoning. I'm not trying to make myself feel a certain way. I'm letting myself sit in what's real, what's actually happening. And silence is actually what completes solitude. Because a lot of us will try to go to a good message. Oh, listen to this message by this preacher. It's a really good message. It'll encourage you. It'll make you feel better. But sometimes after listening, it's even hard to get through a message sometimes, right? When you're restless, you're like fast forwarding. Where's the good part here, right? And sometimes even it's silence that actually completes solitude. It's not a preacher. It's not a worship song. It's not a podcast. It's not a good worship track. It's not sanctified vessels. No, I'm just kidding. But it's not even good worship that leads us to that place with God, but it's the quietness. Sometimes it's the overwhelming quietness. It's that overwhelming sound of nothing. Or even for me, I actually sit in the backyard and I hear the trees rustling, or I hear children playing because we live by a school, or I hear cars zipping by. It's the silence of the world around me, but me actually tuning into where I am in that moment. Me being present at where I am right now, and my mind not being somewhere else. So silence is what completes solitude. And it's actually during our times of silence and solitude with God that three things, I believe, happen. We receive his love. Because we can sit in silence and we can sit in that time, that intentional time to be with God, we can sit and identify our false selves, we can identify our fears, we can identify our performing selves, and we can just sit and receive his love. We can be reminded that we are his beloved, that our identity first and foremost is not the title at your job. It's not even me as a mother of 3. It's me as his beloved. Second, we offer ourselves to God. In that time of silence and solitude, it's not for us to force anything, to be like I need to feel like I'm with God. No, it's offering ourselves to God exactly where we are. Right where we are, the realness of the anxiety we feel, the realness of the rush we feel, the realness of right where we are, we offer ourselves to God. And it's in that space he can meet us as we offer ourselves to him. He can embrace us. He can heal us. He can breathe on us. He can remind us. But it's in that moment as we just offer ourselves to God just as we are. Not the person that we think he wants us to be, but just as we are. We make ourselves open to hear him speak. It's that intentional time and space to just be with him. And so those are the three things that I believe happen during silence and solitude. And I want you guys to keep in mind that of three things. To know your personality, I'm going to get practical here. To know your personality, your season, and stage. Know your personality. Are you someone that loves to be outside? Are you someone that would prefer to sit on a chair and just be inside? Are you someone that loves, like, I don't know, wind, or, like being in a refreshing place? Know your personality. Know your season and your stage. Like many of you guys, I don't have long stretches of time because my kids love following me. like it's even hard to take a shower because they're like, hello, mommy. And so know your personality, your season and stage. Think practice and not performance. It's going to take a while for you to get used to silence and solitude. It's not something that just happens overnight. It's not even something that happens in weeks or a month, but it's just practice. I love spiritual practice instead of spiritual discipline because practice takes a little pressure off. It's like, I just need to keep practicing this. Be consistent. Keep doing it. And so think practice, not performance, and think short and long. It's going to take, again, time for this to become regular in our lives. Now, I'm going to go into how to actually practice silence and solitude. First is to pick a sacred space. And by sacred, I just mean a space that you can go to, a familiar space. For me, a familiar space is actually outside on a camping chair in my backyard. I just literally take 5 steps out into our backyard, I sit on a camping chair. And my temptation as a mother is to start cleaning our backyard, but I just sit there. And I look at our backyard, and that's my sacred space. My spiritual director, Patty, she actually says, look for a space or a refuge, somewhere you can always go to, somewhere you can run to just to be with God. So for us, it could be outside. William loves to sit on our porch outside. So pick a sacred space that you can consistently go to. And second is pick a time. When we're inconsistent with time, that's when we get restless. It's like, oh no, like I didn't do it, so now I'll just do it after lunch. And the inconsistency makes us perform and not practice. And so pick a time that works for you. I'm going to give you guys an example. William prefers silence and solitude in the mornings. So I'll drop off all the kids while he gets his time in the morning to get silence and solitude. And I actually prefer the afternoon because by the afternoon, I'm feeling like I've been going at 100 miles per hour, and I would really appreciate the time to sit down in the late afternoon before the kids come home. So he picks up all the kids in the afternoon so I could get an afternoon of silence and solitude. And so pick a time, a sacred time that works for you guys. It might be before work or after work or during lunch, but pick a time. And third is remove distractions. I found it really helps when my phone's not even on Do Not Disturb, it's out of my reach. Like I leave it in the house or I just get rid of my phone. I just try not to even let it be on Do Not Disturb because then I'll look at the time and get distracted. But remove distractions. And fourth is practice a breathing prayer. Silence and solitude is not intercession. It's not a time to sit there and intercede and to be really intense about your time with God. It's not even a time of Bible study where you're sitting there and going deep into studying His Word. It's literally a time to just be with Him, to just sit with Him. And so breathing prayer helps me a lot because what it is it's just a prayer where you breathe in and you breathe out, a very simple one-line prayer. For example, Jesus, thank you. I go, Jesus, thank you. Or, Lord, here I am. Or, thank you, Jesus. These very simple prayers take the pressure off for you to be like, well, what do I say to God? What do I have to say to Him? But no, just breathe in and just very short prayer, very simple, very easy. Just breathe in and breathe out. Acknowledge His presence. Be with Him. And so I just shared with you guys how to practice silence and solitude. And again, I want to actually close with this. I want to say that it is so important, you guys, to keep at it. Be intentional. I almost want to implore you because it has been so sacred to me. It's actually in my times of silence and solitude that I go out into the backyard, I sit down, and sometimes I have 5 minutes, sometimes I have 30 minutes. Like sometimes literally I have 5 minutes before the kids get home. And sometimes I have 30 minutes or an hour where I'm able to sit there. But to the best that I can, I try to be intentional and actually practice it consistently. And it's actually in those moments where I sit outside and I close my eyes. Sometimes I keep my eyes open because closing my eyes makes me more distracted because I'm thinking about all these things. Sometimes opening my eyes and looking at the trees or looking at our grass helps me. But it's actually in my times of silence and solitude that I enter back into the forest where God reminds me that I can have an abundant life. I return back to Him. And I just imagine that forest and I tell God in the silence, I'm like, okay, I'm going back into the forest. I want to have an overflow of joy. I want to have an overflow of peace. And everything kind of slows down and I'm like, okay, this is where I want to live at. This is the pace I want to live my life at. And so I'm sharing this with you guys because I earnestly believe that that is what God desires for us. He wants us all to have an abundant life. It's not just a myth, it's not an empty promise, but it is His promise to us as His children that we can live a life of overflow, that we can live a life of peace. And it's not to say we don't experience anxiety or we don't experience hard days or overwhelming days, but it means that it is available to us and we can live in it. And so right now, actually, I'm going to try something new, and I wanted to end with a time of silence and solitude with all of us. And so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to invite you guys. You don't have to do it right now. I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to invite you guys to, close your eyes, or you don't have to close your eyes. You could do whatever you'd like. But I'm going to invite us to a time of silence and solitude. I want to invite you guys to get into a comfortable position, whether it's you leaning back, it's you breathing in, leaning your head back, just releasing yourself. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read one scripture, and I want to give you guys just 2 minutes to sit in the stillness and quietness of God's presence. And you will see what I mean when I say that your mind is moving. You're probably thinking about lunch right now, right? You're thinking about what's going to happen next. But just in this moment, let the sediment settle. Let the emotions in your heart settle. And just give this time, no pressure, no performance, no forcefulness. Just be with God. So I'm going to read this scripture to you guys real quick, and then we will go into a 2-minute of just being with God, and I'm going to close us in prayer. So in Isaiah 31, it says, "This is what the sovereign Lord says. In quietness and rest, in your salvation, in quietness and trust is your strength." So I'm going to read that one more time. Rest is your salvation, and in quietness and trust is your strength. Rest is your salvation. In quietness and trust is your strength. So God, thank you so much that your promises are real, that you desire to give us an abundant life that is filled with your love, your peace, and your joy. God, I ask for the grace, because I know it's not something we can do on our own, something that we can muster with our own strength. But it's through your grace, God, that we can live a life at a pace that allows us to live from a place of overflow in our identities as your beloved. I ask for the grace to just hear your voice in those moments where we sit in stillness before you. We thank you for this community. We thank you for this day. And in Jesus' name I pray, amen.